and a warm welcome to our fifth lecture in the module on managing and developing people and organizations. Today's lecture covers the topic of Week 8, individual characteristic and behavior, and the topic of Week 9, recruitment and selection. The lecture is structured in 5 sections, and each section is recorded separately for the ease of your viewing. In the first part of the lecture, we will consider how individual characteristics impact behavior in organizations. In the second and third parts, we will focus on 2 core areas of individual differences that influence organizational behavior. These are cognitive abilities and personality. In the fourth part, we will discuss recruitment and selection methods, and in the fifth and final section, we will explore how organizations manage diversity in their workforce. In the first part of today's lecture, we will consider relationships between individual characteristics and individual behavior. Let me start with a question. Have you ever had a bad boss? If you're like most people, you would have at least one bad boss horror story. A recent survey of UK workers conducted by recruitment consultancy Glassdoor found that 2 in 3 employees have had a bad boss at some point in their career. According to the data, the most common issue with management was disrespectful behavior, which was flagged by almost a half of all respondents. Disrespectful behavior ranged from ignoring employees to taking credit for others' work. The survey also found that about a third of workers had skipped work because of a terrible boss, and 1 in 5 have resigned because of a bad boss. Now, how do you deal with a bad boss? In the same survey, 40% of respondents say they would try to ignore an annoying manager. However, the majority would take some sort of action. 1 in 5 employees would alleviate their frustrations by gossiping about their boss behind their back. Some would confront the boss or complain to their boss's boss. And a rogue 5% said they would be proactive and would try to get the bad boss fired. And what would you do, I wonder? Here's another piece of interesting information. In a recent experiment, US researchers found that people were 50% more likely to be dishonest in the afternoon than in the morning. Researchers attribute this result to the psychological depletion effect. As the day wears on, the increasing fatigue makes us reduce our self-control, and so we're more likely to make wrong moral choices. We're not necessarily talking here about big things like committing fraud or perjury. We're talking about little everyday occurrences that can happen in any job, the situations in which we must make, however small, moral choices. Should I leave that mess for someone else to clean up? Should I write my report in such a way as to make my co-worker appear less competent than she really is? Should I conceal my own incompetence? We're not saying everyone is corruptible given the circumstances. What matters is that when self-interest conflicts with the motivation to be ethical, a person usually requires self-control in order to stick to the moral behavior. And when you get tired out by the stresses and strains of the day, you may not have the mental resources to maintain that self-control. Interestingly, and perhaps counterintuitively, the psychological depletion effect applies especially to people who are generally more morally engaged, people who pride themselves on doing the right thing. So, why do some bosses behave badly? Why do different people react differently to bad bosses? Are some people more dishonest than others? Are all people more likely to be dishonest in the afternoon? These are just a few examples of the myriads of why questions we ask ourselves every day about behavior of our relatives and friends, our subordinates, peers and superiors, and possibly even about our own behavior. Which brings us to a bigger question. Why do people behave in a particular way in a particular situation? Or more generally, what determines individual behavior? The most general answer to this question is that behavior is a function of both the person and the situation. And all three of these, person, situation, and behavior, affect each other in an interactive way. People act in a certain way because of who they are and because the situation in which they find themselves demands a particular kind of action. And then the way people act, that is their behavior, also influences the situation. And so they go, behavior, situation, and person influencing and altering each other in different ways. So, to understand behavior, we need to first understand the person. As individuals, we're all unique. Each is one-of-a-kind combination of genes, physical features, background, and life experiences, values, and worldviews. In some ways, however, we're also similar to some others. We identify, explicitly or implicitly, with particular social groups or categories. We're young or old, teachers or students, parents or children, liberal or conservative, outgoing or shy, and so forth. Finally, because we're all members of the human race and are a species different from, say, whales or ants, we are also all the same in some of our underlying makeup, features, and tendencies. So, although each of us is unique, and each individual's behavior is unique, and the way we do things is unique, there are also commonalities in the way the members of particular groups would behave, and there are also general overarching principles of human behavior that are applicable to everyone. And when we examine behavior, we look for commonalities within groups, so that we can understand how belonging to a particular group or category makes a difference and helps to explain a person's behavior. And we also look for the general principles that apply to all human beings. And we try to figure out under what conditions differences matter more than commonalities, and under what conditions it is the other way around. So to understand behavior, we also need to understand the situation. We all know that what we do and how we do it depends on circumstances. Think, for example, of the different situations in which you find yourself, at work and in your leisure time. And think of different roles you play in your life: an employee, a manager, a customer, a friend, a parent. Different situations bring with them different expectations as to what we're supposed to do and say. Talking of saying things, we say hello differently depending on who we're addressing. We sit differently depending on whether we're at our desk, at work, or on a sofa in front of TV at home. Our facial expressions, the tone of our voice, the gestures, and the posture differ in different settings with different people. And that's just scratching the surface of behaviors. So, how can we make sense of a variety of situations? How we can tame this variety and bring some order into chaos? Here's where the concept of situational strength enters into the picture. The concept of situational strength refers to the extent to which a situation restricts the expression of individual differences. A strong situation constrains the person's options. Strong situations lead everyone to construe the events the same way. They induce uniform expectancies regarding the most appropriate response. They provide incentives for the performance of that response and require skills that everyone has to the same extent. So a strong situation guides, pushes, or induces people to behave in a particular way. In contrast, a weak situation does not indicate or prescribe a particular course of action and leaves the person to behave pretty much as they please. Weak situations are not uniformly encoded, do not generate uniform expectancies concerning what behavior is desirable, do not offer sufficient incentives for performance of such behavior, and can also fail to provide the learning conditions to generate such behavior. So to give an example, crossing a busy city road is a strong situation. Most people would look for a pedestrian crossing and would wait for the traffic light to turn green for the pedestrians before attempting to cross. So where you cross and when you cross is pretty much predetermined for you. On the other hand, if you're out there in the countryside going across an open field, this is a weak situation. There are no signs telling you where to cross and no traffic lights to tell you when to cross. A strong situation largely predetermines individual behavior, and we would expect the majority of individuals to behave in a similar and predictable fashion, irrespective of their individual differences. A weak situation places few or no constraints on behavior, and that's where the individual differences come into play. How does this relate to behavior in organizations? Organizations aim to make individual behavior predictable. They therefore try to construct the strong situation conditions for their members in as much as possible. How do they do it? Well, they lay down the rules and regulations that define how employees should behave in particular circumstances. Some organizations go as far as to provide their employees with specific scripts they're expected to follow. Say how to greet a customer, how to reply to a request, how to walk, talk, and even how to smile. And then organizations all provide incentives for behaving the right way, and they punish the members who stray from the path. However, even in a very scripted situation, there's always some room to do things differently. It is like a classical orchestra. If we give the same music score to two different orchestras, we will have two very different interpretations of the same piece. And many situations in organizations are not and cannot be scripted, and so the organizational members have to improvise. And then it looks more like a jazz ensemble that develops variations around a given theme. It is impossible to predict beforehand all circumstances that organizational members may encounter and to construct a strong situation for every action that they need to take. Organizations do not have full control over their members and therefore require other ways of ensuring that individuals behave in the way they're expected to. So, what are these other options? These options take us away from the situation and shift our attention towards the person. Organizations can teach individuals to do the things the right way, and in various training programs, organizational members learn what to do and practice their newly acquired skills. Or, alternatively, organizations can try to pick the candidates who are more likely to exhibit desired behaviors. And this brings us to the question of what individual differences matter in organizational context. Recall from your study of work analysis what individual characteristics we discussed. Recall in particular the ONET framework, which identifies three worker-oriented areas: worker characteristics, worker requirements, and experience requirements. Worker requirements, such as knowledge and skills, and experience requirements, are obviously specific to particular occupations and jobs. In contrast, worker characteristics are a more general area of factors that are relevant across occupations and jobs. And that is the area that will give us the clues to individual characteristics we need to examine. Again, hopefully, as you remember, there are 4 categories of worker characteristics: abilities, occupational interests, values, and styles. Now, 2 of these categories, occupational interests and work values, tell us more about how individuals would choose their occupations and jobs. As you recall, occupational interests are an effective evaluation, like or dislike of particular activities. Depending on whether you are realistic or artistic, enterprising or conventional, you would have a preference for particular occupations and work roles. Your preferences for particular occupations and jobs would also depend on your work values. Work values are the aspects of work and work environment that are important to you and your satisfaction. They highlight what you want to get out of your work. Are you looking for a job that allows you to utilize your strongest abilities and gives you a sense of accomplishment? Or are you looking for a job with good working conditions? Are you looking for a place that provides a friendly, non-competitive environment, or a place that allows you to work on your own and make most of the decisions yourself? Okay, well, these are these 2 categories. In contrast, the 2 other categories, abilities and work styles, have more to do with how organizations choose individuals for particular jobs. So what are abilities? Abilities are relatively enduring basic capacities that are required for performing a wide range of different tasks. And what are work styles? Well, these are personality and dispositional factors that can affect how well the person performs a job. So, the study of individual differences asks 2 fundamental questions. In what ways do people differ from each other? And how do individual differences affect individual behavior? For example, what individual characteristics make someone a successful MBA student, military officer, or business executive? And just as it is reflected in the ONET framework, the 2 sets of individual characteristics we focus on in the context of organizational behavior in HRM are abilities, what you may call the can-do factors, and personality, or the will-do factors. So, abilities define the individual's potential to do certain things, like achieve a particular level of performance. In contrast, personality reflects individual willingness or predisposition to act in a particular way in a particular situation. Through your study of work analysis, you have learned that there are 4 general types of abilities important in organizational context: physical abilities, such as strength and stamina; psychomotor abilities, such as finger dexterity or hand steadiness; sensory abilities, for example, night vision, speech clarity; and cognitive abilities, which include mental processes such as understanding language, learning, reasoning, and problem solving. You have also learned, particularly through your work analysis task and your presentation and discussion at the seminar on work analysis, that among these abilities, not all are relevant to all jobs. Not every job, after all, requires physical or psychomotor abilities. But one category stands out for its importance to any job, however simple or complex, skilled or unskilled. And this is cognitive abilities. That's why, in the second part of this lecture, we will focus on cognitive abilities. So please move on to the next recording when you're ready.